Matthew.
Thanks, Sarah. Two questions, if I may. First, who's primarily responsible for what appears to be the failure of this healthcare legislation?
I would say Democrats. They're responsible.
Given
Sure.
that they're in the minority.
Absolutely. They're responsible for passing Obamacare. They're responsible for creating the mess that we're in. They're responsible for being unwilling to work with Republicans in any capacity to help fix a system that they know is completely flawed and have publicly said so. I think that it's pretty clear, and I think the responsibility lies on their shoulders. Zeke?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I want to ask you about two statements from the president. One coming up a year ago this
If
Friday.
you can speak up.
Sorry, two statements from the president. One coming up a year ago this Friday at the Republican National Convention as he accepted that party's nomination. He said, "Nobody knows the system better than me, which is why I alone can fix it." So, if the president knew the system so well, does he owe his supporters an apology? That he couldn't get health care across the finish line.
For what? Having the stock market at an all-time high, creating jobs, putting ISIS on the run, getting rid of countless regulations that have made the business climate better. Should he apologize for that? Absolutely not. We should be very proud of the progress that we've made in the first 6 months and the continued progress that we're going to make over the next 7.5 years.
Second question, another statement regarding your response to Matt. This is from November 8th, 2013 from the president. Leadership. Whatever happens, you're responsible. If it doesn't happen, you're responsible. So why is the president trying to shunt responsibility over to Democrats? Doesn't he own any of the blame here?
The blame of a program that was created and forced through before he took office? No. But the process of reforming healthcare is certainly not over, and we're going to continue to focus on reforming the healthcare system and putting one in place that isn't a failure like Obamacare.
Sarah, both you and the president have suggested that Obamacare is simply dead. In fact, though, there are millions of people who still depend on it, and the president has decisions to make, as was noted earlier, the payments to insurance companies and subsidies. He can push this over the cliff, as Senator Schumer said a short time ago. He has the power to do that. It's not simply going to fail on its own. He has the power to do it.
I disagree with you. I think we're seeing it fail day after day after day as millions of people.
Well, if it's already failed, it can't fail day after day after day. You're saying it's dead. You're saying it's dead. It's not dead. There are still millions of people, many of them the forgotten men and women you like to talk about, who still depend on it. And he has the power to kill it dead. He has the power to push it over the cliff. Are you saying he's already made the decisions on subsidies and payments to insurance companies that would finally kill it?
No, that's not what I'm saying. Again, in terms of Obamacare being dead, it's an unsustainable program. When something is unsustainable and it can't be revived.
You're not saying it's dead.
I do.
There are people who depend on it. Millions of people. Many of them your supporters.
Right,
his supporters.
And
How
that's
could it
why
be dead?
that's why the process of repealing and replacing would need to make sure that those people are continued coverage, and that's been a big focus and one of the priorities of this process throughout from the beginning.
Is he going to help push it over the cliff?
Again, I think this is already going over the cliff and doesn't need a push by the president.
Sarah, when you've spoken to the president earlier today, said that this system will continue to collapse and will get to a point where Democrats have to come back to the table and join in trying to find a way to fix it. What specifically does the administration think would be that point where we would get a group conversation that has not happened yet?
I think that's a question, frankly, you'd have to ask the Democrats. I think they're the only ones that know what's going to bring them to the table.
You're the ones who keep saying that there's going to arrive a point at which the system has failed to such a degree that suddenly there's a willingness to compromise. So, like, what are you envisioning?
Well, I can't
Failures
imagine
of
that. I
individual
can't imagine that
plans?
as this program, as he laid out, goes deeper and deeper off the cliff.
You're either off the cliff or not off the cliff. You don't go deeper and deeper off a cliff.
What is the point that you're describing?
The point is Obamacare is simply unsustainable. We've said this 100 times.
But you're saying
it's
you're
not a
gonna revive
program
that
that can
point.
be revived. It is essentially a dead program in terms of being able to provide the type of health care that Americans need and deserve. And our point is the priorities that the president has laid out. We have to have a plan in place that actually provides care, not just coverage, that brings the costs down, lower deductibles, across the board reform. And at this point, hopefully Democrats will see how bad the system is and come to the table.
What specifically is going to happen to bring them back to the table?
Again,
Other than, I mean, you're saying it's unsustainable, it can't be supported.
I would
and the
think that
president is
those
saying it's
things
going to get to a
alone
point where Chuck
should
Schumer
wake
knocks
up
on the door.
Democrats and make them want to come to the table. Again, I'm not going to speak for the breaking point of Democrats, but I can't imagine that as we continue down this road, they don't come to the table to try to help save healthcare in this country.
When it comes to ACA, you're blaming Democrats, but Democrats are saying there were 99 amendments by Republicans in ACA. What do you say to that?
This is still, a Democrat piece of legislation. It was written, it was forced through. Not 99 amendments to how many hundreds of pages of legislation. It's outrageous to make this a bipartisan bill. I think everybody knows exactly who was part of that process, and it certainly wasn't Republicans.
And the last question.
Yes, ma'am.
Some congressional leaders, particularly Democrats, are very concerned about the trust factor when it comes to Jared Kushner and his security clearance, and also still remaining in the job. What does the president have to say about his son-in-law right now in the midst of this storm, with the fact that more information continues to come out after he gave his initial statements? And they're concerned about the trust factor when he has a critical piece of security clearance that deals with issues of trust. Is the president considering allowing him to stay or leave? And should he keep his security clearance?
I don't know of any changes that would be made. The president has confidence in Jared, and I'm not aware of any changes at all.
Sarah,
Sarah, is it fair to say the president was blindsided last night? Can you walk us through it all, when he found out, when senior staff found out, how this unfolded?
I'm not going to get into the process piece and the TikTok and the back and forth. Again, as we've said a dozen times, our focus is on the repeal and the replace, not the process piece of it, but making sure that we get this done.
Also, Sarah,
Sorry.
one more. Can you confirm the president did tell lawmakers again last night that they would look like dopes if they did not go for the repeal and replace?
I'm not sure. I'll have to check and get back to you.
Thanks, Sarah. I want to ask you about the president's pledge to get more Republicans elected in 2018. He said earlier today that he's going to be working very hard to make that happen. Does that go for two Republican incumbent senators, Jeff Flake and Dean Heller, who are not on board with this healthcare plan?
Due to legal restrictions, I'm not going to get into any potential election questions. Kristen.
Sarah, thank you. You continue to say this is Democrats' fault. The reality is they were willing to sit down at the table with you guys and negotiate to try to improve.
I missed all of those phone
Obamacare.
calls coming
They
in.
but they said they weren't going to work with you guys on repeal and replace. So isn't it fair to say that you guys were dug in and wouldn't find common ground with them as well?
Not at all. We've been very clear from the beginning. We're willing to sit down with Democrats and talk about how to reform the healthcare system. And until they recognize the fact, I think, that Obamacare has completely collapsed and failed, I think it will be hard for them to move forward in the process.
In
But their
2012
unwillingness is pretty well documented.
In 2012, at Real Donald Trump's Twitter account tweeted, Obama's complaints about Republicans stopping his agenda, and I'm quoting, are BS. Since he had full control for 2 years, he can never take responsibility. Doesn't the president need to take some responsibility for this moment, Sarah?
Look, I think we're taking responsibility in terms of pushing new legislation through, but not the failures of legislation that happened before the president got into office. I think you also have to take into account the outrageous obstruction that we've talked about pretty frequently up here, not just on healthcare, but across the board, and just allowing the president's administration to be fully staffed and be able to fully carry out the duties of the office.
And I understand what you're saying, but this moment is not about the legislation that was passed before the president took office. This moment is about the president and Republicans who campaigned on a promise to repeal and replace Obamacare for 7 years, the president for the time that he was on the campaign trail, not living up to that promise to the American voters. Doesn't he need to take responsibility?
Like I said before, the debate and the battle over health care isn't over. We're continuing to push forward to repeal and replace Obamacare, and we're going to continue fighting for that every single day. So you're speaking as if this is over and done, and it certainly isn't. Abby?
Sarah, so outside of the White House a couple of weeks ago,
Mitch McConnell said either Republicans will agree to change the status quo or the markets will continue to collapse, and we'll have to sit down with Senator Schumer. So he was suggesting that sitting down with Democrats would be a consequence of Republicans failing to repeal and replace Obamacare. Is McConnell and the president, are they on the same page about whether or not they really do want to work with Democrats on this? McConnell seemed to indicate that that was the plan B, not plan A.
The president has said all along that he's happy and willing to work with Democrats on repealing and replacing Obamacare.
But do you guys believe that that's the way the process has actually unfolded in the Senate?
In terms of Democrats being unwilling to come to the table, yes.
In terms of whether the Senate Republican leaders have been open to Democrats?